Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, let's get the view on what's going on in Brussels, because a senior European Union legal official has announced this morning that the United Kingdom will still be able to revoke Article 50 and remain in the EU, and to do that unilaterally. Now, though the opinion of the European Court of Justice Advocate General isn't binding, the court does tend to follow his stance in its final rulings. Well, let's bring in our Europe correspondent, Mark Stone, who's been following all of this very closely indeed. A significant opinion then, Mark.
Yeah, no question, but it is just that, an opinion. It is not the judgment of the 28 judges of the ECJ yet. The background is pretty straightforward. A cross-party group of MPs, MSPs, members of the Scottish Parliament, and MEPs wanted clarity. They wanted to know whether Article 50, which was Britain's formal intention to withdraw from the European Union, a letter delivered to Donald Tusk by Theresa May 2 years ago, whether or not that letter could be withdrawn, because Article 50, 272 words of the Lisbon Treaty, written incidentally by a Brit who you were talking to earlier on, is not clear as to whether or not it can be withdrawn if the country that posts that letter wishes to do so. So these MPs wanted clarity. They appealed first of all to the Scottish Parliament, who referred it up to London. There was then an attempt by the British government to stop this from going further on up to the European Court of Justice, because the British government lawyers argued that it was a hypothetical, that they had no intention of withdrawing Article 50 anyway, so it was no business of the European Court of Justice to even look at it. Well, it appears, judging by the opinion of the Advocate General, that the ECJ, the European Court of Justice, disagrees. They think there is a case to answer, and to that end the Advocate General has offered his opinion. Have a listen.
Cuando un Estado miembro ha notificado al Consejo Europeo,
when a member state has notified the European Council of its intention to leave the European Union, Article 50 of the Treaty on European Union admits the unilateral revocation of this notification, up until the moment the case concludes with the withdrawal agreement, provided that the revocation has been concluded in accordance with constitutional norms, is communicated in a formal manner to the European Council, and does not constitute abusive practice.
This does raise quite a lot of questions, Adam, not least the idea that does this mean that the UK could simply withdraw the Article 50 letter in order to buy more time for further negotiations or for a renegotiation? Or could it be the case, as some are suggesting, that you could withdraw the letter and then resubmit it? In other words, stop the clock and restart the clock, giving the UK a further 2 years in which to negotiate a new 2-year period, because Article 50 is quite clear that it gives a 2-year window for withdrawal negotiations to take place, which is why it's coming to a head now, because that 2 years is about to run out. Well, the Advocate General has been quite clear that he believes it could only be withdrawn unilaterally in accordance with the member states' constitutional requirements. What he means by that is that there has to be a constitutional reason domestically in the UK for the withdrawal of that letter, effectively a second referendum, and it must not involve an abusive practice. They are worried, the European Union side are worried, that if Article 50 is able to be revoked by any country at any time, then that would mean that countries could simply use it as a bargaining chip, as some in the UK might think they can now do, given his opinion. Just withdraw it, put it back in, withdraw it, put it back in, to get concessions out of the EU. So there is a caveat there, but his judgment, his opinion, seems to be that it can be unilaterally revoked, which opens up, as you were saying with Faisal, a further window, a further option for MPs as they ponder how they might vote next week. I should stress, as you did, it is an opinion, it's not the judgment. The 28 judges will rule on their view, but probably not until after the meaningful vote next week.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's get the view now from the People's Vote campaign. I'm joined now by Alistair Campbell. You may remember, former Director of Communications for Tony Blair in 10 Downing Street. Welcome to you indeed. Do you think these various moves we're getting here at Westminster and also in Europe are making it more likely that your campaign might be successful?
I think we've certainly got momentum, and I think the events are driving in that direction, because this place is failing to agree, and that's becoming clearer and clearer. And I do think there's a sense that the country's changing its mind as well. I think that's been happening for some time. And I think just this sense of utter chaos, the inability of parliamentarians to sort this out, the inability of the cabinet to agree on a way forward. So I do think that what a few months ago people said was utterly impossible, I think is now becoming probable.
But it's not clear what question you'd like to ask people in this people's vote,
well,
is it?
I know what I'd like to ask, but in the end it's going to be down to Parliament and the Electoral Commission. But I think that, you know, for me, I think Remain has to be on the ballot, but equally I don't see how Theresa May's deal, if it's as comprehensively rejected as it looks like it's going to be, I think that dies. And I do think it's only fair in a way that the real Brexit people are allowed, if you like, to have their say. But I think that's where the choice is coming.
But I mean, what are we now? We're 112 days or something like that from Brexit. People's vote, how long will that delay Brexit for? You know, even if it was a vote to leave in the end?
Well, I think at some point, amid the chaos that looks like it's going to be coming in the next few days, I think at some point there's going to have to be a request to extend Article 50. I think that's almost inevitable as well. Now, I understand why Theresa May is constantly saying, no, this is the only deal, this is the only way forward, it's my deal or it's no deal. I understand why she says all that, but I don't think it's making any inroads whatsoever on the debate.
I mean,
at some point, there'll be an extension.
The essential reason why she's saying that is because she's trying to find a compromise between people who want to remain and the majority who voted to leave, and she thinks this is the best deal.
I understand that as well, and I can see how she's tried to bring two sides together, but she's ended up pleasing neither of them.
Well, that's what a compromise does, isn't it?
I think normally effective compromise, and I think that if you look back to the way she's conducted herself since she became Prime Minister, let's be frank, right from the word go, she made no effort whatsoever to bring the Remain side over. She was very much focused on the right wing of her Conservative Party. She's upset them now for fairly obvious reasons, but also the deal literally satisfies nobody because it is a bad deal, and she can go around the country as much as she wants. And all this fuss about the legal advice, which I kind of understand from a procedural point of view, but the truth was told yesterday, the Attorney General admitting he gave the advice, this is a bad deal.
Well, I mean, I want to ask you about the legal advice because I thought you might have some sympathy with the government here, because we remember the long and painful process about Lord Goldsmith's advice about going to war in Iraq. I think it cost a cabinet minister in the end. The principle the government stood by was that you shouldn't reveal all of your legal advice, you should just give an outline of what it is. That's exactly what Mrs May is saying today. So do you have a problem with that?
Look, I do understand where she's coming from, but I think that actually I think the substance of what the Attorney General said yesterday, for me, was kind of what I was particularly interested in.
Sort of good enough. Yeah.
For me, yeah, but I'm not a parliamentarian, I'm not in there, I'm not sort of focusing and obsessed with the procedure. And I do think there's something in that sort of, you know, the Attorney General, yes, he's of the government, but he's slightly separate from the government. But I think when you've had a parliamentary vote that the government decided not to contest, I mean, again, tactically they got that wrong. So, look, that's going to be, I think, to be honest, I think that's going to be forgotten fairly quickly. The substance of the debate which gets underway today, is this a good deal for the country? Is it going to bring the country together? Is it going to make the country stronger and more prosperous? And we know the answers to that from the government ministers' own mouths.
Finally, what do you say to those people? You know, we hear this constantly when we go out and about talking to people saying, look, I voted leave, the majority voted leave, why don't we just get on with it and deliver on the democratic will of the people?
I understand that as well, but it has to be translated into something that then, and that's what the Prime Minister did. She tried to turn it into something. It's going to be rejected by Parliament, but equally, the Rees-Moggs and the Farages and the Boris Johnsons, their it doesn't have a majority either in that place. And so therefore, I think that the public, let's be frank, Adam, the debate first time round was not terribly well informed, it was not terribly honest. We've now had a long time to look at what Brexit actually means, and I think we can now have a more honest and informed debate where those two, if you like, those two fundamental questions, do we want to stay or do we want to go out with the sort of hard Brexit that Rees-Mogg and Boris Johnson want? That's where this is heading.
Alice Campbell of the People's Vote campaign, thank you very much indeed. That case was brought forward by a group of Scottish politicians in February, coordinated by the QC, Jolyon Maughan, who's the director of the Good Law Project. He's with me now, along with Tom Harwood, who's a reporter at the Guido Fawkes website, and also here, lawyer as well, Joanna Cherry, the SNP's Justice and Home Affairs spokesperson. Welcome to you. So, Jolyon Maughan, first of all, what's the significance, as far as you're concerned, if this is confirmed, that the European Court of Justice says Britain can withdraw its plan to withdraw unilaterally?
It's not just your viewers who are struggling to know what's going on. MPs are also struggling. And what this case does is it sort of shines a beam of light down from the heavens, or up from the hell if you're Tom, I suppose, showing that there is a clear path for MPs who think that the national interest is best served by remaining. We could simply cancel the Article 50 notice, we'd avoid no deal, and we would remain in the EU and retain the benefit of the opt-outs, the rebate, we'd be outside Schengen, we hadn't have to join the euro. All of that stuff would still be available to us.
Do you feel that coupling this with the amendment that we now know Dominic Grieve is going to bring forward, that, as it were, the door is being shut a bit on no-deal Brexit, which many Brexiteers would like?
That's why I and the other petitioners brought this action. I was one of 6 Scottish parliamentarians who brought this action to the Scottish courts and to the Court of Justice, along with Jolyon and with the support of his Good Law project. And the British government have fought us all the way, tooth and nail, spent a huge amount of public money in trying to prevent MPs from knowing that Article 50 was revocable. And of course, the crucial thing about knowing that we can revoke Article 50 is knowing that Theresa May's dichotomy between deal or no deal is not accurate, and there's a way out of this. And I think Hilary Benn's amendment, which I've put my name to, will hopefully create the conditions where Parliament can look at the alternatives to Theresa May's deal or no deal, and one of them will be revoking Article 50, keeping the United Kingdom in the European Union on the current terms and conditions that it has.
I mean, before that, you've got to get through Dominic Grieve's amendment today. What do you think the chances of that being defeated are?
Well, I'm very much focused on the chances of defeating the deal, and to be honest, I haven't really applied my mind to Dominic Grieve's business motion amendment because I've been so busy doing media this morning about the Court of Justice
decision. But it's the one that allows amendments, effectively.
Yeah, but so does Hilary Benn's. Hilary Benn's amendment to the motion on the deal allows us to vote down the deal and then look at hard options afterwards. It's a similar sort of tactic to the one that Dominic's using. And I think the crucial thing about this decision is it's just a preliminary decision of the Advocate General, but in 80% of cases the Court will follow the Advocate General, and so MPs will know that if a second referendum was held, then if people voted across the UK to remain, then we could revoke Article 50.
Because that still is the question. I mean, we've just been hearing this afternoon about how Parliament is sovereign over government, but there is still a legal question, isn't there, to the extent to which Parliament could assert its will in the event of not endorsing the government's deal.
Certainly there are some difficult questions of political machinery that focus on the incredibly arcane business of the House of Commons. I mean, I went and spent an awful lot of money buying the Bible of Parliamentary Procedure, Erskine May. It still all looks like black magic to me, I'm afraid. But basically you can focus on this one point. If a majority of MPs don't want no deal, then no deal will not happen. If a majority of MPs decide that the national interest is best served by remaining, remain will happen, because we do not live in a dictatorship, we live in a parliamentary democracy.
I mean, without getting too fuddy-duddy, I mean, this actually goes back to the Bill of Rights in 1688, doesn't it?
That's right, because the Prime Minister is exercising the sovereign power of the Queen. It's sort of delegated to her. And what the Bill of Rights decided, amongst other things, was that Parliament is supreme. And Parliament, not the government, gets to make these calls. And that must be right. You have to remember Theresa May wasn't elected leader of the Conservative Party and didn't win a general election. So the idea that she ought to hold supreme sovereign power above that of our Parliament is bananas.
Now, what about, I mean, it's no secret that Guido Fawkes' website tends to be fairly close to hard Brexiteers, if I can put it that way.
The pulse of the nation, really.
Yeah, all right. I was going to ask you, I mean, what's their morale like? Do they see this slipping away from them a bit?
I think Brexiteers have been a bit knocked down for the last, well, year, really. I mean, since the referendum, since the few weeks after the referendum, the internal contest within the leadership of the Conservative Party, all the way back in 2016, the Vote Leave vision for Brexit was severely eroded as soon as Theresa May became Prime Minister. As soon as you have someone who voted Remain, believes in Remain, is terrified of the prospect of no deal leading the country, you're going to end up in a sticky situation and sticky negotiations. And I feel that...
But she did adopt the red lines, she did talk about citizens of nowhere. I mean, she took the rules out of their playbook, and that led all the way to the lack of success in 2017's election, didn't it?
I think it speaks to sort of the SW1 interpretation of what voting leave meant, that you see it as citizens of nowhere. That, in many ways, is a Remainer interpretation of it.
The red lines are a Leaver interpretation.
The red lines, I'll grant you, but the prospect of citizens of nowhere, or Amber Rudd's list of migrants, these are things conjured up by Remainers trying to pretend to be more Leave than Leavers. Actually, what we see in the hostile response that Leavers have to the withdrawal agreement is that everything isn't about immigration. The withdrawal agreement is actually pretty comprehensive about taking back control over migration.
But again, Mrs May says immigration comes absolutely first.
Well, exactly, but Leavers are still not happy because Leavers don't only care about immigration. Leavers also care about who decides our laws and how we control our trade.
So where does that leave the Leavers then? Carry on whinging?
I think it's a bit rich to call it whinging when what you've seen is a narrow group of elites for the last 2.5 years do their utmost through lawfare, through parliamentary procedure to try and frustrate the will of the people. The people still want to leave the EU. We've seen 2 polls in the last 2 weeks that show actually even no deal is more popular than Remain, according to panel base last week. The people still want to leave this country, and the politicians need to realise that they're not representing the people of this country.
This is just nonsense. I mean, I'm not from SW1, I'm from EH14 in Edinburgh, and I represent people of Scotland who voted to Remain. But the point that's not being covered here is that we had 2 prominent Leavers in 2 of the highest roles of government, David Davies and Boris Johnson, throughout most of this period, and they've simply been unable to deliver on the promises they made because those promises were undeliverable. They have never come forward with an alternate plan. They promised people all sorts of things 2 years ago that they've been unable to deliver upon. Now you're trying to make Theresa May the fall goat for these guys, the fall girl for these guys bluff and bluster.
You say that.
You've had 2 years. You've had people in prominent roles of government. Now you're trying to blame the British establishment. I can assure you that I am not part of the British establishment. I'm a Scottish nationalist who wants an independent Scotland. But I fought to get the right for the whole of the people of Britain to think again in the light of the facts, not the lies and misrepresentations that the Leavers put forward, but the facts that have come to light in the last 2 years, that all these things promised by the Leave campaign cannot be realised, and that leaving the EU will damage the economy, people will lose jobs, people's living standards will drop. And so that's what we're fighting against. It's about the truth now. It's not about lies and misrepresentation and electoral fraud.
Jolyn, take a sort of impartial lawyer's view.
Impartial?
Do you think that, I mean, we know where you stand on Brexit, but looking at it all, do you think there's any justification in this case from the Leavers that somehow they were sold out from the beginning by Mrs May?
I wouldn't have put it quite as Tom put it, but I do think there is this issue. When the Leave campaign was running before the referendum, trying to encourage people to leave, they basically ran 2 contradictory pictures. To a group of people who wanted the UK to turn its back on globalisation, they said Brexit will enable us to do that. We'll close the borders, we'll impose trade restrictions. And then there was another group of individuals in the country who were offered by Brexit as a completely different thing. We'll deregulate, we'll throw the doors open, we'll have a much more liberal immigration policy, you'll be able to bring curry chefs in from Bangladesh. And those 2 constituencies are in real contrast with one another. So the way in which I think about it, genuinely the way in which I think about it is there was never any majority for any vision of Brexit. There was only a majority for remaining.
Tom.
This is nonsense. The Leave campaign was entirely consistent that you can have a generous immigration system while controlling it. The message was about control, and actually what we see is the vast majority of people now not only want us to get on with Brexit, but are also pretty united in what they want the country to look like in 10, 15 years' time. Comrades came out with a poll yesterday that showed 2/3 of people want the UK to be the most competitive, low-tax, open trading country in Europe. And that even includes the majority of Labour voters. That's not true. That's not true. Listen to Professor John Curtis and actually not just nitpick your polls, but look at a broad spread of the average of polls. Look at the average, and that's not true.
Different polls say different things. I think we can safely say that.